All right. Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, brothers and sisters. My name is David G. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. I'm also a grateful recovering sexaholic, and I have a recovery date in both programs, AA of August 1994 and then SA October 1st of 2019. So I was very grateful to celebrate a year with you folks this past week with SA, and I just thank you so much for my sobriety and for being here. You know, the past several weeks, we've been looking at in the book, we went through the forewords, we went through the doctor's opinion, we looked at the physical as well as the mental, and then we followed that up by taking an in-depth look at step one through the first three chapters of the book. We looked at Bill's story, how he recovered as a result of taking the steps. We then moved into there is a solution from there, more about alcoholism. That all covered step one. The last few weeks, we have been into step two, which is the chapter 4, We Agnostics. And we finished up that chapter last week. And what a powerful chapter that was in showing us that we could be restored to sanity from the insane thinking that always feeds us the lie that we can once again use or act out without any danger. And that's been the lie that has controlled most of our lives. This week, we're going to be looking at how it works. And this week and next, we're going to be looking at steps 3 and 4, which is contained in how it works. I have a little book here that has the original manuscript to chapter 5, and it's written somewhat differently than the way it was in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous today. It's the same thing, only they reworded it. Some of the things were changed in it. But I thought that I would start with it. And we hear this read at every meeting that we go to, especially in AA. They read chapter 5, how it works, all the time. And I read through it for so long, and I even had it memorized because you hear it all the time whenever you go to meetings. But what I failed to do was really stop and ever take a close, in-depth look at what this chapter was trying to tell me, and particularly in those pages that were read so often. And what I began to see that there was a powerful message contained in here, especially on page, 58 and following. I was just like, good God, I can't believe that I ever missed that. But I like to use the original manuscript on the first couple of pages of it. And I'll just start out and we'll go from there. It says, the following is the 5th chapter, how it works, from the original manuscript of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a version that was distributed to friends and colleagues of the fellowship founders to get comments and suggestions on what to change before sending it to the printer. And this is what they had printed and sent out prior to the book being changed. And so here it is as we know it. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our directions. That's how it was written in the original manuscript. Today we know it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. In those days, it was directions. They had Bill take that out. Now here's a powerful piece of information here that I never seen before. And it tells me there's 2 kinds of people that are not going to make it in this fellowship. He says there's those who do not recover. And if we don't recover here, there's only one other option. And it's not a very good one. If I don't recover here, I'm going to die, most likely. This is people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. So there's 2 types of people there. We know that in Alcoholics Anonymous, those that cannot are usually people who are wet-brained. They're never going to make it back. But there's also people in here that I have met through the years. They say things such as, I cannot make that many meetings a week. I cannot work this certain step. I do not have time for this. I will not confess to another person. I will not make all of the amends. So I've met a lot of people like that. And some of them even stayed sober, but what I did see is that they never did recover. And there's a big difference between recovering and staying sober, and we've talked about that from day one. So that sentence to me today is very important. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely, and that'd be the key word, give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. Now, they may not have been born that way, but they seem to be. They're naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. But this little book says they are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a way of life which demands rigorous honesty. Big difference. Their chances are less than average. So really what the book is telling me up to this point, all the work that I have done, all the work from the forward all the way through the first 3 chapters, the chapters We Agnostic, we looked at all the examples laid out that we did in We Agnostics. It still tells me whenever I get to here, if I do not completely have the willingness to give myself to this simple program, then my chances are still less than average at this point. That's a pretty scary statement. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. And a lot of the meetings that I would go to over the years, people would always say that. That was always, anytime that they stepped to the podium to share their experience, strength, and hope, that's the first thing that they would tell you. I'm here to tell you tonight what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. But after studying the book and being around for a little while, I look at that somewhat differently now. Us as sexaholics, us as alcoholics, we know what it used to be like while we were out there. I don't need to come in here and give you a 25 or 30-minute share on what it used to be like. I'm pretty sure you have a good idea of that. What I like to do today is I like to take a look at what it was like when I got here. When I got to this fellowship, what was I like? Where was I at? What happened to me as a result of sitting around here, just going to meetings and not working the program? What happened that made me reach for that bottom and say, I'm willing to go to any lengths to do this after I'd been here for a little while? And then what am I like now as a result of doing this work and working the steps as outlined in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous? What am I like now? He says, if you've decided you want what you have and are willing to go to any length to get it. I went to a meeting one time and they spent the whole hour for the next 2 days talking about what it was. If you want what we have and you're willing to go to any lengths to get it, well, what is it? And they would go in, well, it is a spiritual experience as a result. And I don't know about you, but when I got here, the last thing on my mind was a spiritual experience as a result of these steps. I didn't really care about that. They said, well, you know, it is sobriety, it's serenity. And I mean, this went on for 2 days. But after being here for a little while and studying the book, there's really only 2 things that I'm after here, that I want to get it. One is freedom from the bondage of self, obviously. And the other is victory over lust, victory over alcohol. That's what I'm here to get. So if I've decided I want what you have, and I am willing to go to any length to get that. And we talked about this in an earlier chat today. One of the first things that I talk about with the guys that I sponsor, and the same thing that was talked to me, are you willing to go to any lengths to do this? And if not, then that's okay. It doesn't mean that we're bad people. It just means that we're not willing. And it's better off to be found out beforehand than after. But it says, if you're willing to go to any lengths to get it, this little book says, then you're ready to follow directions. Big difference in what was written in our regular books. It says here, at some of these, you may balk. They made him take that out as well. You may think you can find an easier, softer way. This little book says, we doubt if you can. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. And I believe that's the day that we walk through the door. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and we took a look at what our old ideas was in chapter 4 over the last few weeks. And it says the result was nil until we let go absolutely. It says, remember that you are dealing with alcohol. I also need to remember I'm dealing with lust. Cunning, baffling, powerful, without help. It is too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now, this little book says. Half measures avail you nothing. You stand at the turning point. Throw yourself under his protection and care with complete abandon. And this little book says it in this way. Now we think you can take it. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. So a lot of times I would hear that whenever I would come in. You know, a lot of people would say, you know, well, I've come in and out of the program for years and years. Now, I've been around for a little while, and I've met a lot of people that have come in and out of the fellowship, but I have never met anybody that come in and out of the program for years and years. Once we do this work, as outlined in this book, which is the program, most of us recover. So I would also hear things like, well, the steps are part of the program. If you read that sentence real carefully, it tells you the steps are the program. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested in this little book, says, as your program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Remember, as we went through these directions, we seen that we were powerless for 2 reasons, not one. Once I stop lusting, I can't stay stopped. And once I start, I absolutely cannot stop. I'm trapped both ways. My life is unmanageable because of a big hole, a void on the inside of me. We looked at that pretty in depth. In step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Not any power, but that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We seen if we were powerless in step 1, then obviously our answer had to be power in step 2. We saw if insanity was driving us to act out over and over with lust, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is. We saw that sanity was the answer. So we seen that step 2 is the answer to the whole program. The other 10 steps keep us in that solution. And if we're not in the solution, we're in the problem, and we're acting out over and over and over. It made it very clear to us through those readings. In step 3, we're going to make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. We're going to look at our will as being our thoughts. We're going to look at our lives as being our actions. And we're going to make a decision to turn the way we think and the way we act. We're not going to give that to God. We're going to turn it over to the care and direction of God, this little book says. So the care of, it would be if you brought someone, a loved one to me, a child, a loved one to take care of, you would expect me to do that to the best of my ability until you were able to come back and do that. We will see up around page 85 or 86 where our willpower is restored. The book says it is the proper use of the will as it's aligned with God's will. So step 11 will become an amplified version of step 3. Remember, it says here, God as we understood him, not as we understand him. Now, in this little book, as you read on through it, in those days, it was God as we understand him. They had him take that out. The reason for me, what I understood whenever I first came into this program is different than what I understood a year later. Some years later, I understood something different. God was love. God could and would. I understood more and more as time has went on through the years. When I will never understand God, but God as I understood him made perfect sense to me. This little book says 4, we make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, we admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely willing that God remove all these defects of character. That's worded a little bit different. But look at how he writes step 7 in the original manuscript. Humbly on our knees, ask him to remove our shortcomings, holding nothing back. Now, if I would have read that when I first come into AA 26 years ago, I probably wouldn't have stayed. So thank God that was rewritten. Step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make complete amends to them all, according to the original manuscript. Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, not whenever. If you leave it up to me whenever I'm going to do that, chances are I'm probably not. So we're going to look very closely when we get to those directions at wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. And 12, having had a spiritual experience, this book says. As the result of this course of action, we tried to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. So as you can see from your book to the one that I'm reading out of here with the original manuscript, the writing was somewhat different in those days. You may exclaim, what an order. I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. So really, that's a great source of information right there, that sentence. The principles we have set down, these steps, this is all they are. They are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, that was step 1. The chapter to the agnostics, that was step 2. And our personal adventures before and after what? Before I lust and after I quit, before I drank and after I quit, before and after. This little book says have been designed to sell you 3 pertinent ideas. Now, I know that's not the language in the other one. It says our description of the alcoholic, the chapter of the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. So that was changed as well. It says, A, that you are alcoholic or sexaholic and cannot manage your own life. And I'm still reading from the original manuscript. B, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism or sexaholism. And C, that God can and will if he was. And it doesn't even say if he was sought. It just says that God can and will. I'm going to read one more short paragraph out of this book, and then I'll put it away. And this is something I kind of wish they would have left in. It says, if you are not convinced on these vital issues, you are to reread the book to this point or else throw it away. If you are convinced, you are now at step 3, which is that you make a decision to turn your will and your life over to God as you understand him. See, it's not, in the original manuscript, it was as you understand him, not as you understood him. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? And I'm going to go ahead and put that little book away. That's an interesting little book, and I have several of those, and I'm happy to send them to Dennis, or if anybody ever wants one of them, just get a hold of me, and I would be happy to get you a copy of that. Very interesting reading. After the ABC, it says this, being convinced we were at step 3, and I know I just read that. It says that we decided to turn our will in our life. Now remember, anytime we talk about our will, we're going to be talking about our thinking. Anytime we talk about our life, we're going to be talking about our actions here. This is what we're going to turn over to the care of God. We're not going to give anything to God, but we're going to turn it over to the care of God as we understood him. Now, I had a son that drowned when he was 6 years old. If I brought him to you to take care of, I would have expected you to take care of him as best you could until I was able to come back and get him. That's the same thing I'm going to do with my will and my life, my thoughts and my actions whenever it comes to God in step 3. So the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Now, if I'm not convinced of that, the chances are that I don't really need to move on any further in this book. If I believe that there's any way that my life can be a success left on my own power, then I need to try that, is what my sponsor told me. Look at this sentence. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody. Now, even in my sobriety, I find myself doing this. For a long time, I would, until I really started the thorough practice of step 10 as outlined in this book. I was always in collision with something or somebody, even though my motives are good. These next couple of pages are going to paint the picture of a man that lives on the inside of us, and we're going to pay close attention to this man as we move through these inventories. There's 3 of them laid out. There's resentments, there's fears, and there's sexual conduct. We want to keep a good eye on this guy that lives on the inside of us when we get to sexual conduct. I never seen him there before until I went through this work the last time. My gosh, he's all over that. No wonder he is very deceiving. Let's take a look at him. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. I don't know about you, but I know about me, and I definitely try to live that way. Doesn't really work out too well, but I try. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show. Not just me, but everybody else as well. He's forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. I want the lights to shine for me. I want the people to dance for me. I want the scenery, and I want the rest of the players to behave in a certain way for me. Now, consciously, I'm not walking around thinking about this all day long and acting on it, but this is showing up in my character over and over and over, and everybody else can see it except me. The book says, if his arrangements would only stay put, if people would only do as I wished, the show would be great. My sponsor told me that may be the case. but then you would have to live with the monster you created. And somehow I feel that's happened to me in my lust addiction for a long, long time. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. Now, in trying to make these arrangements, our actor, or David, in other words, may sometimes be quite virtuous. I may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest or self-sacrificing. Now, that's one part of me to get what I want. Now, when that don't work, let's see how I behave. I become mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he's most likely to have varied traits. In other words, I do whatever it takes to get my way most of the time whenever I'm living in my disease. Well, what usually happens? The show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. That's a dangerous area for the sexaholic. That's a dangerous area for the alcoholic. Anytime that I begin to think that life doesn't treat me right, I immediately go into self-pity. I start to sulk or get into silent scorn, or I come out swinging, So either way, anytime that I think life doesn't treat me right, I'm in a bad place. He decides to exert himself more. There's danger in that as well. He becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still, the play does not suit him. It's never going to suit me. It's never going to be enough. I don't care what you do. You can do everything that I tell you to do and it's still not going to be enough. It never will. There's the part of me that I'm going to look at in step 3. I'm the noticer. I'm the judge. I'm the jury. I'm the executioner. All of these guys are wrapped up into the character of this man right here. And this man is my disease. Admitting that I may be somewhat at fault, I am sure that other people are more to blame. I become angry, indignant, self-pitying. Man, I'm setting myself up for relapse every time I find myself here. What is his basic trouble? Am I really not a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Now, I could be kind to my wife. I can be loving, but there's things that I want. And if that doesn't turn out the way that I think it should, then I become very hateful, very mean. And I'm sure many can identify with that. One of the few times that the big book is going to talk about you and I being a victim is in this sentence here. Is he not a victim of the delusion that I can rest or I can squeeze some kind of satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only I manage well? Is it not evident to all the rest of the players, my wife, the people in the fellowship, everybody, that these are the things that I want? And do not my actions, there's one of the things we're going to be turning over, our life. And do not my actions, my life, make each one of them wish to retaliate. Now, snatching all that they can get out of the show, am I not, even in my best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? And I heard it kind of put like this. This guy is an actor who wants to be a director, and what he really ends up becoming is a producer of confusion, disharmony, all that stuff. And that's exactly how I am. Our actor, talking about me, is self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. He is like the retired businessman who lulls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining of the sad state of the nation. And I kind of do that as well. Life can be going pretty good for me, and I can sit around and complain about other people and how this could be better and that should be better and all of this, Well, that's easy for me to say whenever I'm out there laying around in the sunshine. But when I'm out there walking that path with you, it's another story. The minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century, politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if only the rest of the world would behave. And I kind of feel that way at times too. If the rest of the world would only behave the way I think they ought to, I think things would turn out pretty great in life. I don't have that kind of power. That's egotistical and self-centered. The outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him. But what has he done to society? And the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up. Whatever our protestations, are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, our self-pity. So here is what they told me is wrong with you. They said, here's what's wrong with you, David. It's not alcohol. It's not drugs. It's not lust, and it's not acting out, and it's not any of those things. They're all a manifestation of this. But those are not the things that are wrong with you. This is what's wrong with you, and this is what we will be watching for from now to the end of days. Selfishness and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our trouble. Now, I can see a tree that's standing out here in my yard, but I can't see the roots to that tree. And it's almost like I can see my fear and I can see my selfishness at times. I can see all of these things, but I can't really see the root underneath it. And I'm going to be able, looking at all of this in these inventories coming up in the next few weeks. But somehow my mind is still going to allow me to forget that the root of my trouble is going to lie right here in my selfish and my self-centeredness. Look at what he says. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Now, I don't mind having fear. I think it is a God-given instinct, and I do believe that we have to have it in order to survive. I'm not going to walk out here and pet a rattlesnake in the mouth, I promise you, because I'm afraid he will bite me and kill me. That's a good fear. That's a good fear to have. But a bad fear would be if I'm not even going to get out in the yard or out close to the woods because there might be a snake out there. Then fear has overtaken me. So when I get to fear inventory, I'm going to look at good fears as well as bad, not just the bad, because all I ever wanted to do was think that fear was bad. And also the reason that I can't ever overcome it is because look what the book says, it's driven by 100 forms. Well, that's quite a sentence there too, the way he has it outlined here. Fear comes at me in 100 forms. That's why once I get over one, another one shows up to take its place, and another and another and another. It's 100 forms. Same way with self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. And this has definitely been my experience. I step on the toes of my fellows and they retaliate. I've done that in my marriage. I've done that in my job. I've done that in this fellowship. I've done that over and over and over. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find, if I look, that sometime in the past, we have made decisions based on self, which later put us in a position to be hurt. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. That takes God out of it. I used to blame God for everything that happened to me. I used to blame you for everything that happened to me. It was your fault, it was their fault, and it was definitely God's fault. I was born this way, I was this, I was that. My book says my troubles, we think, are basically of my own making. Quite an interesting 4 or 5 next words he's going to write here. They arise. What a word. They arise out of me. So that tells me this stuff is buried deep down inside of me. And whenever I get into these inventory, we're going to start pulling this stuff to the surface and we're going to start dealing with it. And it's not always easy. Sometimes it's very painful. But the alcoholic, sexaholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. But I usually don't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics, we sexaholics must be rid of the selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. And I can remember my sponsor sitting across the kitchen table and reading that to me. And I said, man, don't talk to me about a loving God. I don't want to hear that because you just read right there that if I don't get rid of this, God is going to kill me. If he's a loving God, why would he kill me? And he made me go back and take a close look at that again. We said above everything, we sexaholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. Didn't say anything about God killing me. It says it kills me. God makes that possible. I do have free will, and he is going to let me have that. That's also a promise. God makes that possible. There often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. And in my experience over the years that I've been here, there is no other way. I've never been able to find one. Many of us have moral or philosophical convictions galore. Really doesn't matter whether we have those or not. It's not going to help us any because we can't live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We're going to have God's help. And you know what? That is one thing that I did not want to read. But I've tried everything else and nothing has worked. So there was nothing left for me except for this. So this is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. And I can remember telling my sponsor, I don't play God. And he said, really? He said, you haven't bulldogged over everybody in your life. You don't tell people what to do and expect them to go do it real quick. You don't try to run the show everywhere you go, not only in your life, but other people's lives as well. I do. That's playing God, and it has to stop. The book says it didn't work. It's not that I don't like playing God, because I do, honestly. So does everybody else. But it don't work. And if it don't work, then there's no point in me doing that. I've finally seen that. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, and I think many of us can relate to the drama of life, God was going to be the director. Now, he's going to give us some conceptions here that we can use. And there's about 2 or 3 of them here. He's going to be our director. There's one. He is the principal. There's another one. We're his agents. He is the father. There's another one. That's one that I couldn't do in the beginning. I just couldn't. My father was anything but loving. He was very mean. He was very abusive. And he was a drunk. And he was just a very, very mean man. I've been able to forgive him in later years of working through the first 9 steps of the program. But for many years, I couldn't do that. So God the Father was out for me at the time. We're his children. Most good ideas are simple. That's why a lot of us don't have them. And this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. Now, we've talked about this arch quite a bit. We've talked about the arch through which we pass to freedom. We looked in step 2 that step 2 was the cornerstone. We was going to look at the cornerstone on each side of the arch. Now, he's going to talk to us about a keystone, and the keystone sets right in the very middle of the arch, is what holds the arch in place. But what we need to understand is there's no way for you or me to put that keystone up there by ourselves and place it and make it stay. We can't do that. We're going to have the help of another person. And that's what's going to happen right here in step 3. We're going to have the help of another person to put this keystone into place. And that's going to help to support this arch. And through the rest of these steps coming up, we're going to complete that arch, and we're going to walk through a free man. Not only will I be sober, I will have recovered from the disease of sexaholism. Not only will I no longer act out, the obsession to act out will not be there anymore. That's a promise, and that is my experience, and that's the experience of many of you on this call today. All right, let's look at 14 promises that's going to be laid out for us as a result of taking step 3. And most of the steps laid out in this book, he talks about the promises after you take the step. But in step 3, he's going to show us the promises prior to taking the step. And then we'll stop right there for the week, and we'll pick up next week with step 3. It'll give us some things to ponder. And if you're willing to do the 3rd step as we come back next week, I think it's a very beautiful experience. It was a life-changing experience for me in 1995. I had been in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous for a year. My youngest son had drowned. I mean, things were coming at me, depression. I mean, I was to the point that I was wanting to stick a pistol to my head and pull the trigger. Honestly, I did. I thought, my God, if this is what sobriety is all about, I don't want it anymore. I'm as miserable as I'd ever been in my life. Now, I had attempted to take this step with a lot of people. I'd sit in circles with people, and it just made me absolutely sick to hear them say this prayer. And then they kind of floated off into freedom, and I just stayed there completely bonded by self. Today, I know why, and we will see it as we move on. But let's take a look at top of page 63 here. And he says this: when we sincerely took such a position, step 3, all sorts of remarkable things followed. First promise right there. We had a new employer. They told me, David, you've been the employee of your life for a long time, and it hasn't worked. You're fired. You need a new employer. Now, being all powerful, if I'm powerless, then powerful is what I need. So him being all powerful, he provides what I needed, not what I wanted, not what I want, but what I need. And there's a condition to that, and here it is. He's going to provide what I need if I will keep close to him, perform his work well, if I will treat my brothers and sisters right, if I'll come to meetings, if I will work with others, if I will reach out my hand in welcome, if I will show you love and compassion and understanding. If I keep close and I perform his work well, he will provide what I need. And what I need is to be sober. I need to be useful. I need to be happy, joyous, and free and content. I need to recover. He's going to provide that. Established on such a footing, we become less and less interested in ourselves. Now, I don't know about you prior to coming here or prior to any type of spiritual experience you may have had, but this was never, ever a reality for me. It was always about me. Never was it less and less about me. It was all about me. But this tells me that established on that footing, I'm going to become less and less interested in me. See, I don't need more God. I just need less David. And once that happens, more God is there automatically. Our little plans and designs, more and more we become interested in seeing what we can contribute to life. I've never wanted to give anything to life. I was always a taker. That guy is going to die in this step. As we felt new power flow in, what about that one? Anybody looking for that in their life today? I guarantee you I was and still am. I still want new power all the time. New power. As we enjoyed peace of mind, how about that one? Man, I've been miserable in sobriety whenever I don't work these steps or do this or think that I've got a better way. My way does not work. This way does, and I'm going to take it. As I discovered that I could face life successfully, what a beautiful promise right there. I've always been unsuccessful in anything that I've ever done. My disease is so demanding. It wants everything. It don't want a little bit of me. It wants all of me. It wants me away from my family. It wants to take my career away from me. It wants to rob me of every bit of dignity that I have, and it's been pretty successful in doing it. But now it says that I'm going to be able to discover that I can face life successfully without it. Look at this one. As we became conscious of his presence. Wow, man, that's exactly what I'm after right there. We began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, the hereafter. We were reborn. And I like to say in this fellowship, today I know I am a twice born man, and I am free as a result of that. Thank God. Not that I don't ever have any troubles in my life or any of that. That's crazy. That's not possible. But today I do have the tools to do that. Today I care about my brothers and sisters. Today I love my wife with all my heart. I want our marriage to work more than I've ever wanted anything in my life. I love reaching out my hand to the brother that's suffering and telling him, come on, man, let's jump on board and let's take this walk together. And we're going to take a walk, and neither one of us is coming back from it. So, and that's happened over and over and over. As we do this third step next week, we're going to take a look at this prayer very closely. Because come to find out, this prayer wasn't even about me. The whole time that I'd taken the prayer, I'd led others through the prayer. Oh, you're this and you're that, and I'm this and I'm that. No, we're none of that. God's all that. And this prayer is going to show us right here that this prayer is going to be about God and my brothers. And David is just going to be the vessel in that. I'm very grateful to have studied this part of the book with you. I love this part of the book. It changed my life. I told you that I went to that sponsor's house that day, and man, I was more miserable than I'd ever been in my life. And he laid this out to me just the way that we read it right here. And he read a paragraph down below the prayer. He read, the prayer's in the middle of the page. And there were some things that were described there that it was going to ask me to do. And once I seen what I was going to need to do, my self-will kicked in, and I said, you know what, I'm not doing that. I appreciate your time, and I thank you for all you've done for me, but I'm not doing that, and I'm never going to do that. And I got up and I left. And a week and a half later, I came back. And I said, okay, I'll do the prayer. And he said, why? What changed your mind? And I pointed to my head and I said, this changed my mind. I'm miserable, more miserable now than I've ever been. I'm armed with information and I'm not willing to do any work. That's a bad place for an alcoholic, sexaholic to be. Very reluctantly, I did this prayer with that man that day. And I tell you, my life changed. That was 26 years ago, 25 years ago now. And although lust followed me and chased me and ran me for a long time, and I didn't have any idea what it was, I can still tell you that I never returned to drugs and alcohol again. My life changed. Things in my life changed. Events in my life changed. And I believe by that understanding that I know today is the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. Whenever I came to Sexaholics Anonymous a little more than a year ago, I didn't come here hoping that God would restore me to sanity. I come here knowing that God would restore me to sanity because of what I had experienced right here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew it would work over here. I knew it would. But I knew I was going to have to do the work, and I was going to be the one who would have to get up and walk. I heard it put this way, you know. I used to sit around and say, God's going to take care of this. Don't worry about it. God's got it. Got to work it out. Got to work it out. And a guy cornered me up after a meeting one day, and he said, David, he said, you know, I've read another book. And it talks in there about where God worked for 7 days, and it never mentions anywhere, or 6 days he rested on the seventh, and it never mentioned anywhere where he goes back to work again. He says, whenever you come to Sexaholics Anonymous, there's somebody going to work, but it's not God, buddy. It's you. And it's going to start right here in this step. This will be our first action step of many of the rest to come. And I tell you, it's going to give us the jump we need to work through these inventories and get on up into amends and walk a free man. So that's definitely been my experience. And anything I've said here today that your sponsor has told you something different, your sponsor's right, not me. This is my experience through the big book, and it's worked for a long time. And it's worked for a long time here in Sexaholics Anonymous too. And I'm not changing it up. If anything, I'm growing with it. So anyway, again, I thank you for letting me share today. Thank you, Dennis, for your service. I love you, brother. Thank you all.